What's the difference between Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, and No Lives Matter? There are two ways of looking at the phrases. Either you mean lives in the form of the state of being alive, having a functioning body, and working heart and brain, or you mean lives in the sense of the history of a person's experience of life. The fate of a living person being alive is at the consequence of accidents, diseases, and murder, while the fate of a living person's life is influenced by personal choice and the environment that they live in. To use an example, let's suppose that out of a list of 100 people, one of those people has committed a murder so bad that it deserves the death penalty. The fate of this person's state of living would be under the influence of law because of personal choices that they had made. All lives matter doesn't mean that the murderer will be exempt from the death penalty, but it does mean the right to be alive should be prioritised by law, and the right for a better life should be prioritised by morals. So even if the murderer never got caught, their life, in the view of All Lives Matter activists, should be less pleasant than someone who never murdered, regardless of any physical or personality trait they had. What's not clear is where All Lives Matter sits on the political scale. On the one hand, it is promoted as a counter to Black Lives Matter, to counter the problems which occur when freedoms are taken away and labelled racist. The movement therefore tries to promote free thinking and favour the law and the elites who run it, and would therefore sit on the right of politics. But All Lives Matter is also a very socialist way of thinking. If all lives matter, then so do refugees, the homeless, and others who don't fit within a nationalist point of view and would be much more welcome within a globalist point of view. In other words, to place All Lives Matter on the far left assumes Black Lives Matter is on the right, while the opposite is true if you swap those assumptions around. Under the assumptions of All Lives Matter, a black life plus a white life equals 2 lives, because both lives are assumed to be of equal importance, and therefore to take one away would decrease the value by 1. But let's suppose we assign one detective and show the detective 100 pictures of the potential suspects. Statistics show that the detective would be more likely to assume guilt among the suspects with black skin. This therefore conversely means an assumption of lesser morals and a less valued state of being alive in the ways the black community are perceived. So the Black Lives Matter activists aim to restore that balance so that someone of white skin is perceived to be just as guilty as someone of black skin. Under the assumptions of Black Lives Matter, a black life plus a white life is always going to equal less than 2 lives, because black lives are currently going to equal less than white lives and therefore less than 1. So therefore taking away a black life from a combination of 1 black life and 1 white life will be less significant than taking away a white life from a combination of 2 white lives. Their aim, Black Lives Matter, refers to black lives being unequal in the present tense, while in their view all lives being equal is a future aspiration, not the present situation. But many take Black Lives Matter to be an exclusive rather than inclusive phrase. So for example, if 2 murderers who were committed of the same crime were facing the death penalty, and one was black and the other was white, then if only Black Lives Matter, then the black criminal would be exempt from the death penalty while the white criminal would not. No Lives Matter activists say that, well, they have both taken lives and not one life is above another, so they should both face the death penalty. Under No Lives Matter, it assumes both white lives and black lives equal nothing. Therefore, taking away a life would have no effect on society, and so does adding a life. There are people who say that no lives matter until Black Lives Matter, which means until 1 black life equals 1 white life, black lives and white lives should both be equal to 0. In other words, nobody gets a slice of the cake until black lives get an equal portion and therefore equal rights to everybody else. They're all aiming to achieve the same outcome, which is that a person's experience of life and fate of death should be given the same opportunity. It's only personal choices that should determine the outcome of one's life. But there is a racist element to the way in which Black Lives Matter is perceived. It could be suggested that people that believe in All Lives Matter aren't really thinking about equal opportunity at all, and are really just fearful that the black community will have equal and or more power than the white community. But if this hypothesis is true, then why? To explain, I'm going to once again go into a brief history of the black community. I'm doing this to try and explain the psychology behind American racism. It's not to make anyone feel guilty, but it does raise a larger debate. All three phases mention lives, but does that mean individual lives, for when we're born to when we die, or the history of people who share the same beliefs, physical characteristics, and ancestry as ourselves? It's certainly true that our experience of life is only as good or bad as it is because of the environmental factors that came before us. But who pays the responsibility for our children and our great-grandchildren? Us or them? Let's use Harry Potter as an example. It's revealed that Harry Potter's father, James Potter, once bullied a wizard named Severus Snape. In one scene, Snape then tries to bear that responsibility on Harry. This is portrayed as unfair because Harry has no control of his father's individual past actions. To use another example from the same story, throughout the books and movies, some wizards look down on people without magical ability, called muggles. But because this is taken as a collective view rather than an individual one, the distinction between right and wrong is less clear. It's only because J.K. Rowling portrays many of the people who share this point of view as bad, and those people end up being defeated, that the reader gets a sense of the correct narrative. But the narrative could just as easily have been written from the point of view of the bad characters, which would put the reader in a different position, which proves that in real life, our perception of history is distorted by the collective narrative of the present. Just because we feel guilty now didn't mean we felt guilty then. Just as our actions we did then are abhorrent to us, actions we do now will be abhorrent to our ancestors. There is no fixed right and wrong. It changes with time. Another example is when slavery was in America. It wasn't viewed as immorally as it is today. It wasn't just about the colour of skin either. Slaves were slaves because the people were easier to persuade and or force to work for free. There's been lots of groups targeted by slavery as a result. Women, Hebrews, or any other captured people. It's only after the Constitution was created that Americans needed an excuse to justify why they needed people to work for nothing to run the economy. Black people could control their personality and their beliefs, but they couldn't control their skin colour. So this gave an excuse as to why American farmers could bully people into working. They made up the stories that black people were violent, stupid, and inhuman, and then people believed it, and believed it was right to keep slaves. And even though with time black people have slowly won more rights, this perception has stayed with them because the white community need an excuse to justify controlling the black community. It's needed to show a control on crime, a control of the economy, and control of society as a whole. Keep communities separate and protected from each other, and you can brush the problems of society somewhere else out of sight. The Black Lives Matter protesters say if you take away the stigma, this negative perception of black people, there wouldn't be disadvantages in getting jobs or education or a decent life compared to the white community, and the problem would be better. When people defend Black Lives Matter with All Lives Matter, it comes across that they don't really understand that disadvantage. The white community who believe in All Lives Matter assume the black community being poorer, more likely to be in prison, and generally having less good lives than the white community is either not true, not the individual responsibility of them personally, or is somehow justified because of the actions of the black community. Black Lives Matter believes the stigma around the black community exists, while All Lives Matter denies it or justifies it. The white community has had to change its morals more than once, and that change takes a while to adjust to. and what we think is right now might not be right in the future. People are fixed on their views and fearful of change. But whichever phrase you use, I'm sure we can all agree the black community deserve not to be assumed guilty for committing crimes based purely on their colour of skin. But do you agree with me? Join in the debate below and subscribe.